Hey, Chapel here, and today instead of focusing on specific spells, I'm going to be doing something a bit different. I'm going to be talking about spells as a whole so that you'll be able to make your own choices on what to play. Now in 1.0 a lot has changed in terms of the armors you can play and the bloods, and because of this it makes sense to split this into multiple parts rather than trying to talk about everything at once. And today's going to be starting with Scholar. So first of all, what is Scholar? Scholar Blood is a blood type that you'll start first seeing in Dunley farmlands and is the core to any kind of heavy magic damage build. To play an effective magic damage setup, you'll want to find 100 Scholar as soon as you can and take it as prisoner so that you're able to keep the Scholar buff active using blood pots. If you can't find an 100 blood, you want to find at least a 90% Scholar, as this is the threshold of spell resets, which is Scholar's main identity. Scholar gives you a variety of buffs, including spell power, cooldown recovery rate, and spell leech, but the big part is those spell resets. It's at the top of its game when you're getting good RNG and proc multiple recasts back to back so you can keep casting. This is the main strength that it has. But generally speaking, where does it sit alongside the other bloods? It would typically be considered the third best right now behind Warrior and Rogue. But unlike the monopoly of Warriors we had in Gloomrot, the top three of Scholar, Rogue, Warrior are all very competitive and close in power. I'm going to be talking about different kind of archetypes of Scholar you can play and the context where they work well. These include arena formats of duels and team fights, and open world formats of roaming, raid offense and raid defense. And I'll use this metric to show what I think of their strength, with S being meta, A being strong, B being viable, and C being weak. I'll also be including categories of spells, and these will be ordered from left to right based on how strong I think they are. I'd like to say I won't be talking about PvE, because honestly you can play whatever you like there, and if you want to be optimal, it's very boss specific. I'm not the right person to be going in depth on PvE, so that's not something I'll be covering. Diving into the first Scholar build, we'll be talking about Single Offensive. This is the safer approach to high damage Scholar, and we'll be using the magic damage set along with Blue Amulet. The idea is to have your primary source of damage coming from a single high damage projectile or AoE, and then having a defensive spell to help protect and back you up from aggression. In typical Scholar fashion, getting resets on your damage spell along with crits is how you'll be dealing big bursts. And on the flip side, getting resets on your defensive makes you a lot harder to dive on. Something I want to mention in particular is how generally counters are stronger than barriers right now, but for Scholar specifically, Chaos Barrier really comes into its A game. The reason for this is because although it helps protect you, it also doubles up as a strong poke tool that with duels also deals heavy CC when it's hit, giving you a long stun that's easy to capitalize on. In terms of how strong it is in different contexts, it's pretty well rounded, and if you're able to play it well, then it's fairly good in almost all situations. The only bit where it falls a bit short is in open world. The reason for this is it's dominated by move speed, and if you don't have move speed, you want to at least be tanky. Scholar is neither of these, so if a fight goes sour, then you're going to have a hard time getting away. As a whole, you might find yourself being bullied by people that are able to rush you down, but with practice you're able to be more confident at dealing with these situations. The second archetype is going to be Double Offensive. This is the ultimate glass cannon setup, and once again we'll be using the magic set along with Blue Amulet. When you're getting lucky with crits and resets, your burst is unmatched and you'll be able to delete people's health. But the trade-off is that people can do the exact same to you as soon as you're out of position. Once you have burnt your dash and defensive weapon cooldowns, there is nothing stopping you getting dove. But if left alone, Double Offensive Scholar will cause havoc. The viability of Double Offensive compared to Single Offensive is wildly different, as it has major strengths and major weaknesses. In the arena formats of duels and team fights, it can work, but you really need to know your stuff with combos and positioning in order to pull it off. As for open world, this is where it gets interesting. If you're playing double offense whilst roaming, it is a death sentence. If you're caught in a spot where you're at a disadvantage, you have no way of getting out. It may be better at max level, where you're more confident in always taking fights, but if you're fighting someone who outgears you, you're going to have a miserable time on this. For raid offense it becomes a bit better. You'll be able to be a nuisance if you can stay safe, but you will be at high risk of dying, because you'll be a high priority target. Where this truly comes into its element though is raid defense. In the protection of your castle you're very safe, and nothing is better at dealing with multiple attackers and golems than having a double offensive scholar that can spam spells and burst down anyone that makes a mistake. Including at least one of these in your raid defense is a very powerful play if they can play safe. Last archetype I'll be talking about today is the support scholar. With the correct setup, this is the tankiest version of scholar with the trade-off of much lower damage. Unlike the other two, you don't want to run the traditional scholar armor, and instead you'll want to play the dread set along with Mist Amulet. The reason for this is you don't care about having spell crit on these spells, so having damage reduction and the healing amp from the set is a lot more valuable. Especially since being on Scholar and having heal spells will put a big target on your head. Something I will say is the way support Scholar plays is unconventional, to say the least. If you're first learning the game, I do not recommend playing this, as it will be a crutch that will stop you from improving. But with that being said, I think this has become very strong in certain situations for 1.0, most notably in Arena. In the Arena setting, you typically won't have access to health potions, and dealing permanent damage to a tanky support scholar is not easy to say the least. You'll need to be dealing either huge bursts or have constant aggression in order to get through their grey health at all. Less experienced players that don't know how to keep up these aggressions or high damage combo will quite simply get stat checked. But this is why I don't recommend this for newer players, because when you can no longer stat check people, you'll have a much harder time versus experienced players that know how to deal with this better. If we now swap to the context of open world, this is where it falls off a cliff though. The value of having a healer here is not very important at all. With access to health potions constantly, these fulfill the same role. And whilst you can help save someone who's in the act of getting comboed, this is not as strong as having your own powerful offense. Now, I can still say this is viable in other contexts because the sustain is still annoying, and as long as you pair it with a high damage defensive, then you'll be fine. Something like Chaos Barrier, Discharge, or Bloodright will still make you somewhat of a damage threat. So I would recommend this over pairing a second support spell or a lower damage defensive. If you do want to use an offensive spell alongside one of these, you can, but I would not recommend it over just using a regular traditional defensive. Alright, that's all from me guys. I hope you enjoyed the first part in this guide series, and stick around if you want to see more soon. Alright, have a good day. See ya.